long before the age of castles, before the kingdoms of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden rose from the northern frost, the Vikings fought a far more ancient enemy: winter. The sagas speak of warriors, raids, and longships cutting across black seas, but the true battle the Norse fought every year was against the cold, a cold so brutal, so unforgiving, that it could freeze livestock where they stood and kill a sleeping man before dawn. But the Vikings had a secret, one that almost no one talks about, a technology hidden beneath their longhouses, buried under soil, stone, and wooden floors. The secret underground fire pit. Not a simple hearth, not a basic fire, but a subterranean heating system engineered with precision, intelligence, and a deep understanding of wind, draft, and soil. It was this hidden furnace that allowed entire Viking villages to survive the darkest winters of Scandinavia, when snowstorms swallowed the world and night lasted longer than day. Archaeologists were stunned when they first found them. Beneath the remains of Viking-age longhouses in northern Norway and Iceland, excavators uncovered a network of hidden fire chambers, cold now, buried in silence, but once the glowing heart of a frozen world. At first, researchers thought these pits were waste dumps. Then, they found soot, burn marks, stone linings heated so intensely that they cracked. And then, the tunnels, thin passageways extending outward from the main chamber, weaving beneath the floors of the longhouse like veins. Too small for a person, yet perfectly shaped to carry heat. These weren't random holes in the earth. They were crafted, engineered. A fire was lit deep inside the pit, far below the main living area. Stones lined the chamber to trap heat. A thick clay or stone slab was placed on top, creating a lid. The heat, trapped and redirected, flowed sideways through the underground channels, warming the entire structure from below. The effect was astonishing. Even in temperatures cold enough to crystallize water on a horse's mane, the longhouse floor remained warm. Not hot, Vikings were practical, but warm enough to sleep without freezing to death, warm enough to keep food from turning solid, warm enough to keep children alive. And the best part? The smoke stayed underground. It escaped through a carefully designed draft channel, usually an angled shaft that vented far from the sleeping area. This prevented smoke poisoning, a deadly threat in the ancient world. But the real mystery was this: why did the Vikings hide these fire pits? Why bury the flames instead of using open hearths like the rest of medieval Europe? The sagas hint at the answer. Some winters were so harsh that a visible fire, its light, its smoke, its scent, was a beacon, a signal, a target. Bandits, rival clans, outlaws wandering the icy nights, all looked for signs of warmth, for signs of life, for signs of weakness. A glowing hearth meant food inside, meat, furs, tools, children. So the Vikings learned to hide their heat, to bury their fire, to warm themselves in silence, to survive without being seen. But these underground pits held more secrets and dangers than modern archaeologists expected. To understand how Vikings perfected these underground fire pits, you have to imagine their world, long before electricity, long before the iron stoves of later centuries. The Viking Age was built on the knife edge of survival, and in the far north, a fire was more than heat. It was life, and if seen by the wrong eyes, it was death. This is why the Vikings developed what archaeologists now call jordkjellere, or earth cellars, and beneath them, the hidden eldgropen, the fire pits that served as secret furnaces. These were not full rooms. You could not climb inside them. They were narrow, stone-lined chambers dug deep beneath the floor of a house or barn, and the brilliance of the design was in its simplicity. Step 1. Dig a pit at least 1 meter deep. Step 2. Line it with flat river stones, stones that could withstand repeated heating. Step 3. Carve horizontal tunnels extending outward just below the surface, running beneath beds, benches, and storage areas. Step 4. Create a hidden vent shaft angled upward, leading outside the house, disguised beneath rocks or sod. This was not a fluke of nature. This was engineering, primitive but effective. A fire would burn inside the pit, the flames invisible from outside. The heat expanded through the tunnels, warming the floors. Smoke escaped through the vent, emerging quietly many meters away, often blending with morning fog or drifting into the forest unnoticed. The longhouse remained warm, but the village stayed invisible. The Vikings understood the cold in a way we struggle to imagine today. Winters near the Arctic Circle were long and merciless. The sun vanished for weeks. Temperatures dropped so low that ale froze in the barrel and iron tools snapped like brittle twigs. In these conditions, a subtle warmth could mean everything. Children curled onto fur-covered platforms warmed from beneath. Elderly family members slept closest to the hidden tunnels. Meat hung above radiant heat, thawing slowly through the night. Even boots and cloaks left near the warm spots were easier to wear the next morning. But these fire pits were more than just heaters. They were strategic weapons of survival. A visible fire drew raiders. A smoking chimney betrayed your position for miles. But with the fire buried beneath the earth, a Viking settlement could appear abandoned, lifeless, while families slept in warmth just below the surface. And there was something else, something archaeologists still debate. Many fire pits were found outside the longhouse, under what looked like ordinary mounds of earth. Narrow camouflaged tunnels carried heat back into the structure. Why move the fire outside? Because if the pit collapsed or overheated, the house didn't burn. This was a lesson learned the hard way. In one excavation in northern Iceland, researchers found the remains of a collapsed longhouse with a perfectly round hole beneath the floor, blackened and fused, a sign the pit overheated and the structure fell inward. After this disaster, Viking builders moved many fire pits away from the sleeping areas. But the underground heating system still had dangers. Tunnels could crack. Gases could leak. The pit could smolder for days, unnoticed, until the floor warmed too much, and the house itself caught fire from below. The sagas speak of families who burned without smoke, a mysterious line that puzzled historians for centuries until the discovery of these underground furnaces. But even as risks grew, the Vikings kept building them, because they had discovered something bigger hidden beneath the soil, a secret that only appears in the coldest winters, and only in the deepest pits. For years, archaeologists believed Viking underground fire pits were only for warmth, a clever adaptation, a survival trick, nothing more. But then came the discovery in Lofoten, Norway, where the remains of an entire winter settlement revealed something far stranger. Beneath 3 longhouses, researchers uncovered not just fire pits, but interconnected tunnels, branching like roots across the frozen earth. Some reached neighboring homes, others ran toward storehouses. One, so narrow a grown man could barely slide his arm inside, ran straight toward a communal hall. This wasn't heating. This was distribution. The Vikings had built a system capable of heating multiple buildings from a single hidden fire. a primitive underground heating network, centuries before the Romans brought hippocausts to northern Europe, centuries before chimneys became common. To fuel such a system, the Vikings relied on something more effective than wood alone: peat. The bogs of Scandinavia were full of it, layers of ancient compressed plant matter that burned slow, hot, and smokeless. When dried properly, peat could smolder for 6, sometimes 8 hours without producing visible flames. Perfect for a concealed fire. When peat was packed tightly into the pit, it produced a deep, steady heat that traveled through the tunnels like warm breath. Vikings textured the tunnel walls with small stones and clay ridges to slow the flow of air, forcing the heat to linger under the floors instead of racing upward. This was engineering far beyond what outsiders suspected. But the strangest discovery came next. Mixed into the walls of these pits were charcoal layers separated by clean clay. Why alternating layers? Because the Vikings were doing something no one expected. They were calibrating their heat. Clay acted as insulation. Charcoal acted as a heat amplifier. Stone stabilized the chamber. Peat was the fuel. Layer by layer, the Vikings balanced the temperature beneath their homes, like ancient thermal architects. But with every advancement came danger. The tunnels in the Lofoten site showed signs of explosive backdraft, a sudden rush of air into an oxygen-starved fire pit that caused a violent flare. The clay lining in one chamber was melted smooth, as if licked by a blast of flame. The sagas mention this phenomenon with a warning: beware the breath of Surtr beneath the floor. Surtr, the fire giant of Norse mythology, a destroyer, a devourer. To the Vikings, an underground fire that roared back to life was not physics. It was a monster, and that monster was unpredictable. In another excavation in Iceland, archaeologists discovered a longhouse with a collapsed central floor. Beneath it lay the remains of a fire pit whose stones had fractured outward. The entire chamber had exploded from underneath, likely killing everyone inside in a split second. But despite these risks, the Vikings continued building and perfecting underground fire pits. Why? Because the system was too valuable to abandon. It allowed entire villages to appear deserted during wartime. It hid warmth from rival clans. It kept families alive through blizzards that lasted days. It allowed livestock to survive in winter barns, warmed from below. And it created something else, something the sagas hint at, but never explain openly: the secret winter halls, where heat was shared not by firelight, but by the silent glow rising from the earth itself. These places appear again and again in Norse stories, warm sanctuaries hidden in frozen landscapes. Now, for the first time, we understand how they were possible. But the greatest Viking underground fire system ever discovered, the one that changed everything, was found where few expected: deep in the volcanic lands of Iceland. In the rugged volcanic interior of Iceland, archaeologists unearthed what may be the most sophisticated Viking underground heating system ever discovered. A settlement buried in layers of lava ash and centuries of snow had been preserved almost perfectly, a frozen time capsule of Viking ingenuity. Beneath each longhouse, they found fire pits connected to an elaborate network of tunnels, not just under a single house, but linking entire clusters of homes. One central pit, nearly 2 meters deep, fed heat to 4 surrounding longhouses. The tunnels were carefully sloped, lined with volcanic stones that retained warmth for hours, and angled precisely to maximize airflow. Heat moved like a living thing beneath the village, rising from one floor to another, circulating in silence, invisible to anyone outside. The Vikings had, in essence, built a subterranean heating grid, a technology modern engineers would struggle to replicate without computers or thermal modeling. But this wasn't only about survival. There was strategy embedded in the design. The tunnels were often concealed under sod or wooden planks. Smoke vents were placed dozens of meters away from the houses, often blending into the natural terrain. Rival clans would approach the village in winter, seeing only frozen rooftops and snow-covered yards, completely unaware that families were thriving in warmth below. This was stealth warfare in the cold. Life itself became invisible to outsiders. Archaeologists found one particularly striking feature: interconnected storage chambers heated from the same pit. Grain, dried fish, and meat were stored underground and kept from freezing even in the harshest storms. Peat smoke, carefully vented, prevented mold while maintaining a constant warmth. The fire pit was more than a furnace. It was a life support system, ensuring the village could survive months when travel or hunting were impossible. Yet the danger remained. The Icelandic pits show evidence of explosive flare-ups, likely caused by sudden oxygen surges or wet peat ignition. In one collapsed longhouse, the floor had been charred, twisted, and split. Yet remarkably, no smoke escaped to the surface, preserving the secret of the fire. Survivors likely rebuilt elsewhere, taking the knowledge with them. Each failure became a lesson, each reconstruction more refined. Some historians suggest these underground systems also influence Viking rituals and mythology. Tales of warm, hidden halls, protected by gods or giants, may reflect the reality of heat rising from secret fires beneath the earth. The concept of Surtr, the fire giant, could symbolize both the life-giving and destructive potential of the pits themselves. One misstep, and fire would devour the floor. Handled with skill, it provided comfort and safety. It is likely this knowledge was passed down orally, generation to generation, refined over decades. Families, craftsmen, and village elders all contributed to a body of thermal engineering, primitive yet sophisticated. Vikings were not just raiders and shipbuilders. They were engineers of warmth, survival, and stealth. And the most astounding part? Some tunnels connected entire neighborhoods, suggesting that Viking villages were capable of collective heating. One central fire pit could keep dozens of people alive through the darkest, coldest nights, transforming a cluster of huts into a single living organism. The secret was simple but revolutionary: hide the fire, control the airflow, and spread warmth through hidden veins beneath the village. It was stealth. It was survival. It was Viking ingenuity at its most brilliant. The final piece of the story reveals how this system shaped Viking life and legend itself. The culmination of Viking underground fire pit technology was more than just engineering. It was a way of life, a hidden lifeline that shaped their society in ways most people will never imagine. Across Scandinavia and Iceland, these pits allowed villages to thrive where survival would have otherwise been impossible. Archaeologists have pieced together evidence of centralized pits feeding multiple longhouses, tunnels carefully sloping to distribute heat evenly. The most sophisticated sites reveal adjustable vents and layered stone floors designed to retain warmth for hours. This wasn't random ingenuity. It was deliberate, precise, and tested through generations. Families relied on these fires not only for comfort, but for survival. Children slept on slightly raised platforms above the tunnels, Animals were kept warm in hidden pens, and food stores remained safe from freezing. The fire pits allowed villages to withstand months of darkness and sub-zero temperatures, when the wind swept down from the Arctic, and the snow was measured in meters. But with all its benefits came risk. A mismanaged fire could explode within the tunnels, causing destruction below, while leaving the surface looking deceptively calm. The sagas, cryptic and poetic, hint at these dangers with references to the wrath of Surtr beneath the floor. Missteps were deadly, but Viking engineers learned to balance fuel, airflow, and tunnel design, turning danger into an art form. Some of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries are the hidden channels connecting storage pits to living quarters. Grain, dried fish, and salted meat were kept warm and dry, without a single chimney emitting smoke. Villagers could survive months without leaving their homes, invisible to enemies or predators. The underground fire pits were not just survival tools, they were strategic assets, keeping both people and resources safe from sight and harm. This secretive technology also influenced Viking culture and mythology. Tales of warm halls, protected by gods or mystical forces, may not have been mere fiction. They could have reflected these hidden fire pits. In a world where survival was a daily challenge, warmth and security became intertwined with legend. Children grew up believing in protective spirits, unaware that their safety was a product of skill, knowledge, and precise engineering beneath their feet. Even more astonishing is that some pits connected entire neighborhoods, forming a rudimentary heating grid that could keep dozens of people alive. A single fire, carefully controlled, sustained multiple homes, storage areas, and communal halls. The villages functioned almost like living organisms, with heat flowing through veins of stone and earth, silently sustaining life in a frozen world. The Vikings, often remembered solely as raiders and seafarers, were in truth masters of survival and ingenuity. Their underground fire pits were an extension of their intelligence, their understanding of natural forces, and their need for secrecy. They turned the harshest environment in Europe into a manageable, livable, and defendable world. Today, these underground pits lie silent, covered by centuries of soil and snow, yet their legacy endures. Modern heating systems, from radiant floors to central heating, echo the principles first mastered by these northern innovators. In the coldest winters, when the world was a frozen wasteland and survival seemed impossible, the Vikings had a secret fire beneath their feet, a fire that warmed homes, preserved life, and inspired legends. The underground fire pits of the Vikings were not merely a tool, they were a lifeline, a symbol of ingenuity, and a hidden heartbeat beneath the frozen north.